Hello, everybody, and welcome to part 12 of our Seeking Harmony conversation and live discussion. Today, we are looking at the potential impact of emotions on voting behavior. And so one of the things that I found very interesting in exploring this topic was that there's actually a branch of psychology called political psychology, which literally looks at decision-making models related to emotion, but not in terms of how candidates are chosen, but not only that, also how people choose to either vote or not vote and show up. And so there's a lot of kind of information around concepts of social responsibility and the concept of altruism, in that as an individual, you may not receive a direct benefit, but through your voting behavior, you're actually creating a greater social benefit that may not necessarily serve your own agenda as a voter. And then there's a whole nother branch in that space that looks at the emotions that are created through political campaigns and how voters are influenced emotionally through those political campaigns. So they may vote for somebody as opposed to somebody else because they have less of a sense of anger with that person, or they have less of a sense of anger with that person's party, as opposed to voting for a specific social agenda in terms of the prevailing politics in potentially their county, their province, their state, that kind of stuff. So I found it very interesting that there's quite a lot of study dedicated to voting behavior from a psychological point of view. So I'm not sure if any of you have come across that kind of thing in any way before.
I think we can look at what happened when Biden won the election, of how, all these Trump supporters like stampeded the Capitol and just like caused a bunch of chaos, attacking people inside and things like that. That's what came up for me.
Yeah, it definitely pertains to and is I think a telling example of what we're discussing tonight, about like how it's really emotional for people. And in terms of like research, I've not come across psychology per se, but like in preparing the topic, I've come across like a Cambridge University paper, and it reminded me of like my social studies, and I've studied like a lot of what happened in Western and Latin American countries in like the 19th century, and it made me realize. And also going back to the civil rights movement, made me realize how in the history of humanity, voting, as we know it, is like kind of young. Like the concept is old, like antique Greece, but voting for most of humanity is kind of young. But its definition is of something that should be based on reason, reasonable choices, and rationality. And what this Cambridge paper was hinting at, and what we've kind of been uncovering as we started to dig into this topic, is that it might be a false idea that voting is based solely on reason and should be based solely on reason, because a lot of people, because it is so young especially, are still voting from an emotional place. And that might be why basically they prefer to look at a representation of someone and what that someone represents for them and for their nation and their choice, rather than looking at just a program. And I think if we take that angle, it should be like easier to explain some of the things that we see as illogical patterns or behavior or irrational behavior in the voting systems around the world. And yeah, it was just an introduction to, just to put it in context, like actually voting is very young, and its definition and its use are not quite the same today, probably.
Yes, I think you touched on something quite important, is that for myself, I don't think that I considered that voting in and of itself is young. I feel like it's not necessarily as young as what we think it is. It's happened for ages. The difference is that it happened exclusively for certain people across ages. So for me, the sense is that it's newer for certain contingents of people as opposed to others, which might shift or create a difference in terms of, for those people that are accustomed to it, they might have shifted a little bit beyond that emotional charge to really starting to unpack campaign messages and what that means for a nation and a community and those kind of things. Whereas people that have been more recently exposed to voting probably might still have a level of emotional charge, in the sense that, one, I am now allowed to vote, and two, and I've seen this play out in South Africa, where people are voting based on representation from a racial point of view, but not necessarily always looking at what that party can or has delivered, and what the implications of that lack of delivery are for a community, for a province, for a country. So I see the dynamic of greater exposure, which might lead to greater maturity from a voting behavior point of view, whereas there's a cycle of learning from people that haven't been exposed to voting behavior, being allowed to vote, understanding the dynamics of politics in a country. So, and I'm talking specifically to places like South Africa that has a significant history of oppression. And so now there's a lot of sentiment that I'm going to vote for this because I don't trust that that won't happen again. And when I say that, I have had some very educated people say to me, I would rather vote for this party because there's no way they're going to support a level of segregation or any type of oppression. But just stopping at the stance of oppression doesn't move our country forward. Like, we have significant challenges around our electricity grid. And our electricity grid is a state-owned enterprise run by the ruling party. So we have rolling blackouts. And so there's a lot of moaning in our country about rolling blackouts, but we don't see a significant plan to shift it so that our electricity grid is maintained better and that our power plants are maintained better. So, like, there's a lot of little components, and I feel like there's a lot of emotion behind how our people are still choosing to vote. And it's a lot for me, my perception is that it's a lot based on our history as opposed to where we need to go as a country.
Yeah, it's kind of like yeah, it's kind of like, sorry. How do I say? It's kind of like when a nation wants to elect a party because it represents a past glory, a certain image, romanticized image of a nation. It's what I feel like. And I'm curious to know, like, just to put it in perspective, like, when did apartheid end, and when did universal voting system, when was it put in place? Like, when was every man and woman allowed to vote equally?
So the ending happened probably from about the year 1990. And again, like, it's been a long process and I think the first actual election where everybody in the country who was of age was allowed to vote happened in 1994. So now you take 1994 to 2022, and it's over 20 years. And in 20 years, we haven't seen significant shifts from a service delivery point of view. In fact, we've seen regression of it. We haven't seen significant shifts in party politics from a job creation point of view. Instead, there's a higher level of unemployment now than there was before. So if we want to look at it from an economics point of view, our country hasn't shifted economically forward. So the incidence of people living in poverty or below what is a livable standard of living has increased. That has been exacerbated by things like COVID, which, I mean, nobody saw it coming, but it's at the same time, there's got to be a point at which plans need to be put in place. So, like, yes, we've got social relief and all of those kind of things, but the social relief is not encouraging people to find employment. And even if they do look, the employment isn't as readily available as it needs to be. So there's a lot of those kind of things that are playing out that would make one need to sit back and go, well, what has been achieved in over 26 years of democracy? And if the things that we need achieved in our country have not been achieved, should we then still be supporting certain parties or looking at actual agendas that are being proposed by certain parties and their capability to deliver on it. Because, it's literally like I can apply for the job of a CEO, but then you give me KPIs, and do I have the capability to deliver those things? If we reduce it to a very rudimentary example of, can I do the job that I've been employed for? Because technically, we are employing politicians through our vote. We are employing political parties through our vote.
What did you want to say?
No, I was gonna say what Granville said made me think of this really silly proposition that Trump did around, I think it was like 2018. The proposition was something in the sense of, this was aiming directly at, I think it was like Generation Z and belower, and some millennials. And what happened was, he was willing to grant, I think it was like student loan forgiveness, meaning in the sense of all of their student loan debt would be completely wiped away if they were to give away their voting rights. But that was, I forgot what happened with it, because it was something that some people entertained, and like people just completely forgot about it because it was just part of the list of the really dumbass things that he's done since his presidency. So yeah. And a lot of these kids were like in poverty consciousness, as you said before. Well, poverty conscious as you brought up before. And I think that's why they were willing to like entertain that situation.
Goes back to our discussion on honoring the power of our choice, and not to give our power and our choice away, because what we clearly see here is that people are more elected on what they represent, the choice, like the choice of a nation, rather than fitting to a job. And I think that's why in most countries, like, people don't see it as a politician as a job. Like, most of them have jobs aside from being a politician, but they even give up if they are like in high instances, I feel. But it's like, yeah, it's definitely a career that needs to be looked at, and protected, and also like discipline, have like some discipline in it, and yeah, I feel like the system of the laws that protect the voting system are there. They are put in place to kind of protect this function and to serve the country. But like, we can definitely see that there are loopholes, especially when like elections, like election period comes along, and then we see that there is always like some, I don't know if it's the same in South Africa, but like in France and in the United States, it always seems like there is someone or several people willing to change the voting system as if it was a good, or change the liberties of people, change like the criteria to meet, to vote, And then you have to really take a look at yourself and say like, okay, is this democratic? Like how, is this a democracy? What will I allow to play out? And I think that's also a power and a choice to make. But yeah.
I like that you mentioned that because, I just recall a conversation that I had with a couple of people a few weeks ago. And I don't know if we've also touched on it in our conversation about the power of your choice. But there's almost another view about the choice to vote or not in the first place. And so, like somebody in the group was saying, well, I just don't do it. And somebody else is like, well, actually, do you realize that people died for your right to vote? Do you realize that? Like somebody gave up their life so that you could have the choice not to make a choice. And like when you put it, when you hear those things in that kind of perspective, it's a very sobering perspective, because it has been fraught by significant struggle energy. And there has been significant loss in order to achieve certain things. And so, like, at some point, you kind of, like for me, I had to sit back and go, like, actually, that makes sense. Like, I like it's a very tough stance to say, actually, somebody died so you can choose to be a lazy ass on election day and have a drinking party. But that's the truth. That is the core of it. The core of it is that a certain type of sacrifice was made in order for you not to have to sacrifice your right, or in order for you to have that equal right. And it shifts. For me, it shifted perspective. I was like, well, like with that mindset, it's almost a no-brainer that I need to exercise that right. And yes, we have the right to choose, but also the choice of not choosing is still a choice, and at the time when that was a significant struggle, if people that preceded us hadn't chosen to stand up for those rights at great personal cost, where would we be? So, and I feel like it takes us back into a conversation we had almost a year or longer ago, is accepting to work within the system and not constantly being upset with the system. Like there's a system that requires us to exercise our right to say this is okay and this is not okay. And in that exercising of that right, we are making an employment decision. We are literally employing the people that need to do things in terms of public administration. We are part of the system. We might not want to be of this world, but we're still part of this world. We do not function in isolation.
Crazy thing is, I can't speak for the entire world, but speaking for the States, that's funny that you say that, because it took an entire pandemic for the world, for the States to see that. Because I brought this up before, by record, Biden holds the largest amount of voters in the presidential history, 81 million people. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's impressive. Yeah. And all of this reminds me of Jeff and Shaleia's live on the Russian and Ukrainian situation. And they took a larger perspective there, and they were like, if you're not interested in politics, you might as well get interested in politics because you can't run from it. Like if you have things to say about your bills and your house and your street, you are in a political system anyway. So you have to get interested in it. And yeah, there was that energy of like, you can't run away from the world you live in. And even more than that, they said something like really strong that stayed with me. I was like, if you don't love your country and you don't care about your country and you're not ready to stand up for your country, you might as well change countries if you're not happy with it. Because then it's just going to be like hard on you, and it's not going to be loving for anyone, not for you, not for your circle, not for the state. And yeah, basically it was like, you have to love the system you're in. You have to love the nation you're in. And love does not mean like, oh my gosh, it's so great. There's nothing to change. Like, obviously, no one thinks like that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be living in the world of system and thoughts that we're living in now. It's just that loving also means going all the way for it, and going all the way for it starts by simple things, like simple acts like voting. Doesn't even start, like the only thing you can really have, the only act of service for your country is going to elections. And there are a few elections. There's not just presidential or parliament election, house election. There's a county and your mayor and all of these things, like so simple, but that enables us to love our country the best, And so yeah, that's what it made me think of. You can't really run away. And obviously, like, choosing not to vote, to abstain, seems to be staying from ego in that circumstance. And so you can't really reason with people saying that, oh, you can cry out after the election that you don't like the choice of politician because you weren't taking your power then. But that's definitely it. Like, you really have to wake up. It's like there's a need to wake up to the love that is there, not sleep on yourself and not sleep on your country. It's like, it's all one and the same. It's individual love, self-love, and love for a nation.
Yeah, and I think that you've taken us into the next piece around, and it's something that Jeff shared with us as well, is that relationship with politics. For me, for part of my life, I was very averse to it. Like, I didn't care. But not caring doesn't solve the problem. It's like, it's literally like not knowing what the rule of law is, not knowing what your rights are, not knowing what your constitution is. Like, it's that thing that defines how you are treated in your country and how you want to be treated. And the knowledge of what you are entitled to as a citizen of a country. And then bringing that into the political realm and going, well, are our political parties delivering on that? Something as basic as the right to earn a living, but you've got almost a 50% unemployment rate. Does this political system then support your right to earn a living when there's no job creation? And if there's no job creation, does it not then become incumbent on you to explore the opportunities to create that job for yourself within the parameters of the system that you're living in? So, again, it literally goes to the stance of, well, if you don't stand for anything, you're probably going to fall for anything or everything. Like you need to actually have a sense of what may be termed national or personal pride, to know where and when to serve your country and how to serve your country. And as you said, sometimes it's as simple as exercising your right to vote in terms of very substantial and substantive issues during election campaigns. Understanding the party's politics, understanding what that brings or takes away from you. Because again, if it's a relationship, you need to understand the dynamics of that relationship. Like we're having a relationship with life, and life has put us inside of a certain system. What is our relationship with that system? And how can we expand our understanding of that relationship and of that system?
Being of service to your country is definitely something that the world will have to learn, like in the future. And as you said that, I was thinking of like, isn't that what we're establishing here? It reminds me very timely so that we are building like a system of heaven, like the kingdom of heaven, where it's like a system. It kind of works like other systems that we might have encountered in our lives. Like it definitely is from that, but like what is at the center is truth, And what I mean by that is you need to serve your country and love it and serve the truth. And I think going back on my history, like I arrived here in my city when I was 18, studied political science, was traumatized by the college I was in, disgusted by political science, got back to political science because of Black Lives Matter and because definitely I showed the way of how to relate to media and news. And I think if there wasn't that model of a system being showed to me, I would have like gradually lost interest probably in the system. But you have to, I guess it's part of my journey, because at the core I wasn't choosing to let go of what mattered to me, And so I needed to have that healing to really stand strong in my values. And one of my core values is to be mindful of the environment around me, and it might be the world, and what we're experiencing globally. And so, yeah, that's definitely what we're building here, what we call model to people. We have a powerful piece of truth. And as we serve and give love to people, we are given energy to serve and give to people. And we have to use it well. And we are learning how to use it. So when I think of like people like waking up to their rights and power, I think about it like being on earth, being a privilege and kind of having to work for it, because that's the system, the universe we're in. And so you have to realize that there is energy behind your thought system. There is energy behind your nation, and you are part of this energy. So you have to participate, not hold on to it.
Yeah, I think the other component is that the role of emotions cannot be separated from the individual. Like you can't not have emotions about things. Regardless of what the topic is, there is something emotional in it. So when we now look at the role of emotions in voting behavior, it's kind of like there's a fuller human being showing up with all their pieces, regardless of how we would assess that piece that's showing up. It's a fuller human being operating inside of a fuller system. And so those emotional triggers are going to happen inside of that system. And what I see during election times is how much more play there is on actually speaking to the emotional part of people and not necessarily the rational part of people. So there's a lot of hype created. And there's a lot of meet and greet energy and rallies and all those other things. And you find this behavior of handing out stickers and t-shirts and buttons and all that other stuff. And it's this energy of creating affiliation. But you can't create affiliation without emotion. You don't create affiliation because of logic. Logic flows once you, like logic is it's the core of stuff, but underneath that core is that emotional thing. It's like, it's what makes us human, you know, and we've been conditioned over years to take the emotion out of things. But it's almost like saying, take yourself out of it. And so, like, you know, for me, there's always this like, when I look at emotion, like when I look at election campaigns, whether it's at the national level or not, it's kind of like this, there's a lot of that energy of trying to create affiliation through appealing to people's emotions. But at the end of the day, that then becomes a very strong pull towards voting for one political party versus another, one candidate versus another. Every time we see a shift of there's greater representation of LGBTQ within this party, for instance, we might, as an LGBTQ person, follow their politics more and keep an eye on their politics more. And almost inadvertently stop following what is that opposite picture, or even having just oversight of that opposite picture because it doesn't align to our model of the world. So there's a big requirement, as you said, Doreen, to look at the truth at the core of things. And a lot of the time to bring together those divergent views. Like really, what's the core of this piece? And does it serve us as a nation or doesn't it? And you might find that there's some significant shifts in how party politics plays out because we are much more discerning about the truth behind many more statements and movements.
What you just like described is the layers of our being, and so the layers of our universe, like physical, emotional, and then there's the core, like the causal, spiritual, and that's where you find the truth. And so it's funny because it's true, people relate, like there is a great show of emotions and speaking to the emotions of the people when there are elections. And a funny example of that in France is that Macron was under fire because he hired a private, probably American-based company at first to have communication in all of its governments and also for a campaign. And there was a lot of funds given to the company. And it's kind of almost a scene here because public service and private services are to be completely separated in the ideal of people. And so it was like, yeah, but I saw the social media of its ministers throughout the years, like the 5 years. I was like, yeah, who do you think they hired to have that? And there's more communication agencies going into the political process because people well know that you have to speak to the emotions of people and play that game to win nowadays. And the next step would be looking at effectively what's at the core of this. It's not just reason, it's not just mental, it's not just emotional, there's more than that. And I think our world is definitely shifting towards that, and things that we saw before are no longer true. Because why would it be that LGBTQ people and people of color support like far right movement? That might be kind of a stretch, but I feel like there's something else calling to people more than emotion, more than history, more than patterns, you know. There's core choices there. And this makes more sense to me than trying to decipher if that person was brainwashed into following a party that might not have been the best for them at first, the best choice. And so, yeah, we kind of have to observe, be attentive to that, and be attentive to the fact that yeah, it's more than class and party and color and gender. And that's another topic inside the topic, but yeah, I felt called to kind of touch on that.
I kind of feel like we're coming back to almost coming full circle to the sense of perceiving or viewing nations as complex individuals. And so in that space, we realize that there are so many components that all work in tandem to create that fuller being. And then you look at a nation and you go, well, those components are just so much more expansive, that they're a lot bigger, and the complexity of maintaining the machine and oiling that machine and running that machine becomes bigger. And so all of these parts start to look quite big, but it kind of takes the sense of looking at it in a very simplified way of the tandem nature of how these things or components operate and how they need to operate. Because sometimes it's not just about the fact that they operate, it's about how do they need to operate, and do they actually operate in that way in the first place? And if they don't, is there this political party that can start to help them operate in the way that they need to operate? And if I'm perceiving that there is that party, then does it not fall to me to ensure that that party has a bigger voice in government to get those parts operating in the way that they need to operate?
That's why there might be less and less, commitment to traditional left and right parties as we knew them before, because people are very much waking up to the fact that it's not just about choosing a side, just for choosing a side. Today, it's more complicated than that, and we need to think about who better to represent us because of their own choice, because of the change that they're, representing, that they're illustrating. And I talk about this because I'm in a country where there are multiple parties, obviously, and there always were, but with like the predominance of traditional parties kind of leading them, kind of having groups with them, coalition with them, making the same decisions. This is not the case anymore. And this very much is like a telltale sign of a change in how politics is done. It's not just, you cannot just go into a campaign and not offer people something more, like perceived or true. They need to perceive that there is value in you, not just settling into, we were great, so we'll stay great, and we've managed this country, so we can manage this country and stay there. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And something that's a shift that, because I've started paying attention to what's happening in our political landscape, one of the shifts that we have seen is that a candidate can put themselves up for election independently of a political party. And that's been a shift in how our, for a lack of a better word, constitutional process has played out in terms of presidential election candidates. But it's also like, you know, like in the run-up to elections, we see a lot more smaller parties kind of cropping up. You know, like you haven't heard about this party, and then in like the last 6 months before the election, all of a sudden there's this new party with their own campaign, and then they do get some votes. And we've seen a shift in a lot of coalitions, especially at the provincial level, which has ousted the ruling party in the province, which has created a sense of discomfort for the ruling party, because at the provincial level, it's shifted. And in the run-up to our 2024 election, it presents the picture of a nation considering a shift. Because if it's shifted in 2022 at a provincial level, and the formation of coalition provincial governments, in the run-up to the election in 2024, if those coalitions have delivered, it's much more likely that people will continue to vote for them in the national election. So it presents a shift into a greater sense of things weren't working, we made a new choice. Our new choice is paying off. We're going to continue to make a new choice. It's kind of like us with our healing. Something wasn't working, there was an upset. We chose to heal the upset brought relief. We reinforced the choice, the new choice, continuously.
I think that was a great way to conclude. I hadn't seen that. This is what I feel, that I hadn't considered how much the world was like in this kind of test and learn position with election. It's kind of fun, and it gives yet another perspective about the election, something more positive, and like, you know, you can trust the choice of your nation, basically, and the power of your people.
Function follows form, right? So we make a choice, that choice yields better results. It's highly unlikely that we're going to make a significantly different choice if the new choice yielded positive results. So the function of the new choice will create a new form and a new level of relating. And so I feel like there's a lot of, as you said, that test and retest. We're running personal strategies, and it's literally test, operate, test, exit, test, operate, test, shift the variables, operate, shift the variables, operate, until we find strategies that work and that yield results. And that's literally, well, that's at an individual level, that's how we heal. So it's we will see it play out at a more collective level. New choice, greater results, better results, reinforce that choice, greater, better results, carry on the trajectory of progress. So yeah, I'm not like like that's my sense of what's happening as well. You know, like we test it, doesn't work, let's move to testing something new. But that test is literally the new choices that are happening perpetually. So yeah, having said that, I feel like we've kind of rounded off our conversation quite a bit today, and definitely something worth exploring in terms of the shifts we're seeing and how those shifts actually reflect individual choices to heal. And so there's a choice at a national level to heal. It's starting to reflect itself more. But yeah, definitely worth exploring in the future. But for today, thank you for the conversation, and thank you to everybody that's been following us and supporting this conversation. And also, please feel free to like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel, where you will find all our previous conversations in this series and past series in terms of topical things that we believe are worthy of conversation and healing. So yeah, thank you everybody for your participation, your following, and we will see all of you next week. Bye-bye.